The most recent TV show of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was pretty obviously going to be somewhat political, given the fact that it is a continuation of the Captain America story, the hero whose sole purpose was being political. And being a Marvel fan, a political junkie, and realizing, V for Vendetta is kinda obvious and pretty overdone, so may as well talk about the political themes of the most recent iteration of the MCU. Spoiler warning for those who haven't seen it and are planning to, because going over some of the political elements is definitely going to spoil at least aspects. I'll try to be as spoiler free as I can, but if you're watching this video, you've probably already seen it, so there's really no need for me to even say it, but just a quick warning. Most people are already aware that Marvel has been known for their leftward bend in regards to the majority of their political themes in their media. And no, this isn't a thing that just popped out of nowhere. This is something that has been historically part of Marvel ever since its inception. However, as the Marvel universe has kind of become a lot more mainstream, they have mostly had to tone down certain elements of their, media. For example, Captain America Winter Soldier, it was political, but what exactly was the messaging? While some people may interpret it as, oh, this was actually showing that S.H.I.E.L.D. was a front for Hydra. Others may interpret it as, well, S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't really a front for Hydra, but military industries like the CIA and FBI might be inherently fascistic in nature, and as such it will breed these fascistic tendencies, whereas others might say, oh, these industries are good, but it's just the bad apples who snuck in and ruined it. And when you actually try to find the real explanation, they'll usually shift to the one that is the most safe, as to not alienate the audience a little too much. Because let's be fair, there are a decent number of Captain America fans who really aren't looking into it as deep as other people who are into Captain America. I mean, some people just want to watch a big buff man fight Nazis. And also the fact that most MCU films are not too long, so you can't really go in depth as much as some other films because you gotta get through all the action, you gotta get through all the adventure, you gotta set up like 10 more movies. However, a 6-episode miniseries, with each episode being 50 minutes long, you can actually go a bit more in depth and go a lot more than surface level critiques. The premise of the series revolves around what happened right at the end of Avengers Endgame. Steve Rogers, after traveling back in time and becoming an old man, has decided that he was going to pass the shield and effectively his title to his best friend, Sam Wilson, also known as the Falcon. Sam is hesitant to take on the mantle because he sees it as a symbol with too much weight on his shoulders, so he decides to give the shield up to a museum to basically think of it as a remembrance of who Cap was in the previous years. Other individuals, like Steve's other friend, Bucky, formerly known as the Winter Soldier, believe the shield is way too important to give up and want someone else to take up the mantle, especially given what recently happened in the MCU has put the world in a bit of chaos. In walks the US government, who has decided, okay, and then they create a brand new Captain America with shield in hand to tout him out as America's brand new icon. Right off the bat, the series tackles the idea of whether or not our national symbols have any real meaning beyond what we project onto them, using Captain America's shield as a sort of XP for pretty much every other national symbol, like the flag, which is something that we in the real world have been tackling as we look a bit more in depth as to what the United States has done over its history, and not really liking what we see. The whole idea of a new Cap pretty much exemplifies this. Both the in-universe and out-of-universe reactions to this new Cap were pretty hostile, which is a stark contrast to the in-universe and out-of-universe reaction of the previous Cap, despite the fact that these two were made for the exact same purpose: propaganda for the United States. Back in the 30s, everybody was all in about nationalistic propaganda. Meanwhile, the modern day, we are a whole lot more skeptical, given the fact the US has done a lot of not-so-patriotic things that we're not necessarily taught about when we're told to pledge allegiance to the flag. And another character that exemplifies this pretty well is the character of Isaiah Bradley. Isaiah was a US soldier who was experimented on with the super soldier serum and became, technically, the first black Captain America, which led to him to have some conflict with the Winter Soldier back in the Korean War. How did this conflict end up happening? Well, Isaiah's men and fellow test subjects were taken and were about to be blown up by the US military, but he in turn went to go save them. And after he did that heroic act, do you know what happened to him? He became the test subject of the United States and Hydra to help create a new iteration of the super soldier serum. His story is pretty much many things wrapped into one. He exemplifies shadiness with the United States government, given the fact that they were doing this experiment unethically, with the story of how he got the super soldier serum to begin with being basically an allegory of the Tuskegee experiment. For those who don't know what that is, it's basically when the United States government basically got a bunch of black people and said, hey, we'll give you some free medical care. And in reality, they were injecting them with syphilis to try and basically see what'll happen. Doing it over the course of like 40 years. 2, he also kind of has an analogy towards MK Ultra, given the fact that Hydra is mentioned to have experimented on him as well. For those who don't know what MK Ultra is, that's when the US government hired a bunch of Nazi scientists to try and invent a mind control serum on a various amount of unwilling test subjects, both in the US and possibly overseas. And his story also tackles one very important aspect: race. His race obviously played a large role in what the US government did to him, because what if I told you there was a white person in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that did the exact same thing Isaiah Bradley did and got a completely different result? You know who that person is? Steve Rogers. And he got to be a flagship character in a franchise. Isaiah Bradley, not so much. This comes to a head in episode 5 when Sam pretty much wants to give Isaiah the shield, but Isaiah tells him point blank, that shield means nothing to me. Which Sam kinda sees where he's coming from, given some experiences that he has in the series, albeit in a lesser quantity. On a similar trend, we have new antagonists that sort of fall under this same parameter. People who felt that they were pushed aside, and as such, they feel that the current symbology means nothing to them. I'm of course talking about the Flag Smashers. Right off the bat, the name probably makes those super patriotic Captain America fans really angry, and their manifesto probably didn't help. Their manifesto simply being that they want a world with no nationalism and open borders, arguing that the mass tragedy that was the blip basically brought the world closer together and made it more peaceful. But now that the people who were blipped away are back, a lot of marginalized people have been pushed aside. Now, as soon as I heard the name and their manifesto, I was basically like, oh, I get it. These guys are supposed to be like a far left antithesis to Hydra. Rather than being like this worldwide fascist organization, these are supposed to be a group of like anarchist rebels. I even went so far as to think, are these guys supposed to be like a comic book version of Antifa? But I was holding off on that until I watched episode 4, when one of the Flag Smashers point blank states that his grandfather fought in World War II as a resistance fighter to the Nazis. I mean, you can't really get more Antifa than that. And it's made pretty clear in episode 1, these guys aren't like the main bad guys. These guys are not good, don't get me wrong. They do bad things. But in the first episode, the US military guy who's Sam's friend says, these guys are like this very dangerous group. But it becomes pretty clear that they're doing this with good intentions, and they're actually more good than not. And there's in fact like maybe a deeper threat down the line. But even then, that bigger threat has some humanity within him. Now on to the last major political theme himself, who has spanned the course of the remainder ones, John Walker, the quote-unquote new Captain America. He, like other villains in the show, are pretty much gray. While yes, him killing an unarmed man in episode 4 is bad, and him being kind of a casual racist in the show, seeing Sam only as a partner rather than a main hero is pretty bad as well. But more in-depth looks will actually show you that he's not as bad as you think he is. Now when I say that, I mean it in sort of the context of, oh, you can't really have a black and white villain in the mainstream media anymore. You just can't. They all have to have some form of humanity because we crave that. How did they become who they are? And for Walker, the question is Walker doing this because he himself is like this? Or is he the product of a system? I mean, he doesn't have the average superhero story. He wasn't like, oh, I gotta take up this mantle to fight crime. No, he was made by the US government. They told him, you are the superhero now. Is he a product of like the US military industrial complex? Or is he a bad person, but the US military industrial complex rewards that kind of behavior? When John Walker is tried for what he did, he goes on a ranty tirade about how what he has been doing as Captain America and as a soldier was basically just him following orders, blaming the senators and the people in charge of the military for what he did, basically saying he was a good little boy following orders. This is what you incentivized until it made you look bad. The US government rewards his chauvinism, so he continues being a chauvinist. But he doesn't even necessarily want to be that, but it's what they're telling him to do. In episode 4, he has a conversation with his friend Lamar Hoskins, where they go in depth about a previous battle that they had, where they had to do a lot of very bad things that Walker felt didn't need rewarding, and yet he got medals for it. So naturally, he thinks, if I take this basically super steroid to try and prevent more bloodshed, I will get rewarded, right? Killing was okay for me to do back then, so it's okay for me to do here, right? Does that excuse anything that John Walker does in the series? Of course not. But it gives you a better insight on who he is. What is he representing? What's his allegory? So those are basically all of the general political messaging that I can think of while watching the series. If I missed any that you thought were really important, by all means, let me know. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when the future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check out my articles on the Independent Political Report.